Yeah.
It is the lone ranked versus ranked matchup of Week 9. So naturally, it is our game of the week. So welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, breaking down everything you need to know for Saturday night's huge Big Ten matchup between number 3 Ohio State and number 18 Penn State in Happy Valley. Now, obviously, rankings-wise, this game is not as big as it could have been. You know, going into this season, everybody pictured Ohio State and Penn State as being a top 10 showdown in Happy Valley. And then Penn State ran off and lost to Indiana last weekend. Brilliant game. We'll touch more on it later. But instead of having maybe number 3 versus number 8, number 3 versus number 7, we have number 3 versus number 18. But this is still going to be a much better game than people think. Everybody is writing off the Nittany Lions after their loss to Indiana. This is still going to be a great game, and this is still a huge game for both teams. If Penn State wins this game, they own the tiebreaker over Ohio State in the Big Ten East, and Penn State is right back in the thick of college football playoff discussion. If Ohio State wins this game, obviously they become the front runner. They still are, but they remain the front runner for the Big Ten East, and they get a huge resume-boosting win to their playoff resume. So a lot of things are at stake in this game Saturday night in Happy Valley. We're going to touch on everything here tonight. We're going to touch on the offense. We're going to touch on the defense. We're going to break down keys for each of these teams. But, you know, it is difficult. We don't have much to base these teams off of going into this game. You know, Ohio State has played in Nebraska. Penn State has played Indiana. Each team has played just one game this season, unlike many of the other conferences that have already played a handful of games so far in 2020. So we're basing it off of one performance that we've seen so far this season. Another reason why I think that Penn State is 12.5-point underdog going into this game. That spread brought to you by BETNOW, guys, and we're going to touch on BETNOW in a second. But Penn State, 12.5-point underdogs going into this game simply because I think they lost to Indiana. If they don't lose to Indiana, the spread is not nearly that high. And again, that spread brought to you by BETNOW.EU. Check out that link down in the description below. You click on that link, you use our promo code GRIDIRON, you get a 100% sign-up bonus. You get a $1,000 cash bonus. I'm not lying about that. That's legit. Go check it out. And it's by far the best place to go place your bets and to get some of the best odds out there. We've loved working with the guys at BETNOW for over a year now, where we place our bets every single week. We hope you guys choose to do the same. So again, everybody wants to write off Penn State. They're not in the top 10. They just lost to Indiana, controversially, some would say. And now they're 12.5-point underdogs. And everybody thinks Ohio State's going to walk into Happy Valley and blow them out of the water. Think again. If you are one of those people that think that, you need to think again. The history between Penn State and Ohio State has been relatively close. The Buckeyes have won the past 3 games against Penn State. Now, the funny thing is, back in 2016, when the Nittany Lions upset Ohio State in Happy Valley, that was the game that put Penn State back on the map. That was the game that really showed that James Franklin had this team back to national relevancy. And since then, the Nittany Lions have not been able to defeat the Buckeyes, losing the past 3 games by a combined 13 points. 2 of those losses coming by 1 point. 1 point, guys. It's unbelievable. So Penn State's been close. They've been really, really close, but haven't been able to get over that hump, falling to the Buckeyes last year in Columbus by 11. So let's take a look at each team here, statistically and talent-wise as well. We'll start on offense, and we always give preference to the road teams. So let's start with Ohio State. We all know who they're led by. We know he's one of the biggest names in all of college football, Justin Fields. The leader of this Buckeyes squad, nearly got them to the national championship last year and was dang near perfect last week against Nebraska. We know Ohio State defeated the Cornhuskers 52-17, overcame a slow start, blew Nebraska out in that second half. But Justin Fields, 20 for 21, 1 incompletion, 276 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also added 54 rushing yards, was the leading rusher for the Buckeyes against the Cornhuskers, and added a rushing touchdown as well. So over 100 yards of offense from Justin Fields alone. 3 total touchdowns from him as well. Absolutely a Heisman Trophy contender. He is this Ohio State offense. There's no disputing that. Without Justin Fields, they would struggle a little bit. No doubt about that. When you look at Ohio State as well, who's there to help out Justin Fields? Who else contributes to the stats and to the points? Got a great wide receiver core. Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. Those are Fields' 2 top wide receivers. And, you can't help but wonder, if you take both of them away, or even if you take one of them away, would Ohio State struggle a little bit? Because we mentioned, Fields had 276 passing yards against Nebraska. Wilson and Olave combined for 233 yards of that. Olave and Wilson were on the receiving end of 233 of the 276 passing yards from Justin Fields. So outside of those 2 wide receivers, there wasn't a whole lot of production. Not saying there can't be, but obviously Penn State has to know, if we can really hone in on Wilson and Olave, which is easier said than done, maybe we can slow down this Ohio State offense. It looks dang near unstoppable. Because outside of Fields, outside of Wilson, outside of Olave, they've got Trey Sermon, the Oklahoma transfer at running back. You've got Master Teague at running back as well. Had 2 touchdowns against Nebraska last week. And this is the Ohio State offense that, along with the beautiful passing game from Fields, put up 215 rushing yards against the Cornhuskers. From top to bottom, this offense is stacked. And I would say they're up there as maybe the best in the country, at least one of the best, and one of the most unstoppable in the country as well. Tall task for any defense to have to go up against. Penn State. Let's take a look at their offense. Unlike Ohio State, they're not as deep, and they don't have nearly as much speed as the Buckeyes. And things just continue to get worse for the Nittany Lions. Not only do they lose to Indiana, a game they were playing without their star running back in Journey Brown, who chose to opt out, but after the Indiana game, they get word that their other star running back in Noah Cain is out for the season with an injury. All in the preseason, we were like, man, Penn State, they're going to have a great 1-2 punch at running back. They're going to have one of the better running back duos in the country. And now neither of them are playing for the rest of the year. I mean, how unlucky can you be? How unlucky can you be? So now, Penn State has to kind of rely on do-it-all player Sean Clifford, their quarterback. I know they have Devin Ford. I know they've got Devin Ford. Had 69 yards in that unlucky touchdown that he should not have scored against the Hoosiers last week. So Devin Ford certainly is going to take over those running back duties. But you look at Sean Clifford, you can't help but wonder if he's going to have to do almost everything for this offense. The quarterback threw for 238 yards last week against Indiana, but he also led the team in rushing last week, 119 yards and 1 touchdown against the Hoosiers. This Penn State offense was balanced. 238 passing yards, 250 rushing yards, all against Indiana last week. We're, only basing this off of one game. So they were relatively balanced against the Hoosiers, and that's something that's going to have to play a major role against Ohio State here. If Penn State wants to win, they're going to have to stay balanced. But they lack depth at running back. Sean Clifford has to have guys to help him out. He can't beat Ohio State as a one-man show. So you lack depth at running back, and you really lack depth at the wide receiver and just pass catcher position, period. You've got Jahan Dotson, had 4 receptions for 94 yards last week. You got Pat Freiermuth, obviously the best tight end, or one of the best tight ends in all of college football. He had 60 yards last week against Indiana. Outside of that, the next best wide receiver statistically came at 29 yards. So you had a 94-yarder, you had a 60-yarder, then you had a 29-yarder. There's a significant drop-off there. So kind of light for Penn State defensively. Shut down Wilson and Olave. Ohio State defensively. You take away Dotson and Freiermuth, and you basically win the game because Sean Clifford doesn't have that much help surrounding him. And again, he cannot do it all by himself. He certainly can't do it all by himself against this Ohio State defense. Many people will look at the Ohio State game last week against Nebraska, and they're going to say, well, that game was close going into halftime. They allowed 17 points. They allowed Nebraska to score pretty quick. I don't know. Their defense isn't too hot. Okay, come on. Really? They allowed 17 points to Nebraska, sure, but they only allowed 3 points to the Cornhuskers in the second half. So they really stepped it up in that second half big time. Sure, they allowed 370 total yards, 210 of which coming on the ground. To me, that's my biggest concern. If you're looking for a negative from Ohio State's defensive performance, it's the amount of rushing yards they allowed to Nebraska. Also, the fact that Nebraska quarterback Adrian Martinez was the Cornhuskers' leading rusher, that has to be encouraging for Sean Clifford, James Franklin, and Penn State, knowing, okay, Ohio State maybe struggled a little bit against a dual-threat QB. We have that in Sean Clifford. So maybe we design our game plan, design some plays to try to throw Ohio State off a little bit. If we can utilize Clifford in the run, then maybe set up the play action, set up some big runs from Devin Ford, maybe we can keep ourselves in this game. So that's the biggest really concern for me for Ohio State. The passing defense was pretty dang good. Keep in mind they're led by Shaun Wade, one of the best defensive backs in the country. So the passing defense is my biggest concern. It's the rushing defense, and more specifically, quarterback containment. They've got to be able to do that against Sean Clifford in this game. Penn State, again, you lose to Indiana, 36-35 in overtime. If you don't score that touchdown by Devin Ford, if that 2-point conversion is ruled the other way, which I personally believe it should have been, the spread's a lot lower. Penn State's highly ranked, again, top 10 team. People aren't talking about Ohio State blowing them out. I promise that. And when you look at Penn State's defensive performance, they played pretty dang well against Indiana. They outgained the Hoosiers 488 yards to 211 yards. So they held Indiana to 211 total yards in that game. To me, it's still crazy that they lost. Still crazy that they lost. And again, I think it was more of what Penn State did to themselves more so than what Indiana necessarily did. On top of the 211 yards, only 41 of those came on the ground. So Penn State, great at containing that rushing game. So unlike Ohio State, which let up a bunch of rushing yards, Penn State didn't. Penn State didn't, which means that the majority of the yards Indiana got were from Michael Penix in the passing game, which when you're facing one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and Justin Fields, that is not encouraging. That is not encouraging. So Penn State, you look at that, maybe Master Teague, maybe Trey Sermon, maybe Justin Fields mobility-wise doesn't have a big day, but the Nittany Lions have to find a way to step up and shut down that passing game. Again, Olave, Wilson, shut them down. Keep Fields contained in the pocket and force him to win it through the air. He absolutely can do that, but it would make your life defensively a little bit easier, a little bit more, less stressful, I would say. And when you look at Penn State, additionally, with along on their defense, before we get to our keys of the game, they still forced 2 turnovers against Indiana last week. They had 3 sacks and 6 tackles for a loss last week, the same amount of sacks and tackles for a loss that Ohio State allowed last week. The Cornhuskers getting 3 sacks on Justin Fields and getting 6 tackles for a loss. So I'm not saying Ohio State's offensive line is bad by any means, but if Penn State can also rack up a little bit of pressure, create some negative plays like they did against Indiana, like Ohio State allowed to happen to them last week, they could actually absolutely hang in this game, no doubt in my mind. So all those stats there, again, you want to just look at the games. If you want to look at the games and not the numbers and not how the games actually played out, you would look at Ohio State and give them a runaway victory here. But when you really break it down, Penn State is not a bad team by any means. They're still, in my opinion, a top 15 caliber team, and they have a chance to prove that to the country on Saturday night. So what are the keys to the game? Ohio State and Penn State. Again, the Nittany Lions always wake up for the Ohio State game. We'll start with the Buckeyes here. Their first key is rather self-explanatory. It is contain and control Sean Clifford. Again, we mentioned that with Penn State and their lack of depth, especially at running back and lack of big-time pass catchers, Clifford's going to have to do everything. He's going to have to buy himself time in the pocket. He's going to have to extend plays. He's going to have to run. And he's going to have to make good throws. Clifford, 2 interceptions last week against Indiana. That's not going to fly against the Buckeyes. So Ohio State, contain him. Don't let him take off and rack up 100 rushing yards like he did last week against Indiana. Force him into some turnovers. Rattle him early. Last year, we didn't get to see much of Clifford. He got injured against Ohio State in the third quarter. Hopefully, that does not happen to him this time around. And Ohio State's going to have to prepare to take him on for the entire 4 quarters. That's something that we know is very difficult to do. So contain Sean Clifford here. You take him away, and you're fine. Because outside of that, Penn State, to me, doesn't have much. Additionally, Ohio State needs to start fast. Last week against Nebraska, I wouldn't say they started fast. They allowed the Cornhuskers to strike first, Something that you don't want to happen here with it being in Happy Valley, even though you're not going to have the full sold-out crowd for the whiteout game. You still have a little bit. And look, any sort of road environment, road game is going to be much more difficult than it is in your own backyard. So start fast. Don't allow Penn State to strike first. Don't allow Penn State to jump out to a decent lead like you did last time you were in Happy Valley. So you didn't come out fast against Nebraska. You didn't come out last time against Penn State when it was in Happy Valley. So you know, the longer that you keep Penn State in the game, the longer you make mistakes, the longer you allow Penn State to linger within one possession, maybe even 10 points, the tougher it's going to get, because the Nittany Lions are going to hold on to that hope. The home crowd's going to get excited, and they're going to start believing that, hey, yeah, we lost to Indiana last week, but we can go down and we can take on Ohio State. We can beat Ohio State, and if we do, we're right back where we started. Penn State, couple big keys for them. The first one is one that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. On top of outgaining Indiana as much as they did, on top of all of the ways that Penn State played to me so well against Indiana, even though they had to come from behind to win, one of the biggest stats that was so eye-opening to me was the fact that Penn State held the ball for 40 minutes and 25 seconds of that game. They held the ball for over 2/3 of the game against the Hoosiers. So Penn State dominated the time of possession again. The longer you keep Justin Fields off the field, the better you have a chance to win. You don't want Ohio State's offense out there, because when they're out there, they're going to put points on the board. If you go down there with Sean Clifford, long, methodical, efficient drives, even if they just end in 3 points, that's better than going 3 and out and sticking Justin Fields out there immediately and wearing down your defense. So own the time of possession. Unbelievable how well they did that last week against Indiana. Do it again now against Ohio State, a game that I think matters even more. You know, last week, Penn State did a poor job themselves of committing 3 turnovers that resulted in 10 Indiana points. Another key for them, take better care of the football. You don't commit those turnovers, you take away 3 of those points, you win the game. So make sure you take care of that football. We mentioned earlier, Sean Clifford has to do better of taking care of the ball. 2 interceptions, that's not going to fly against Ohio State. You give them the ball back, they're going to make you pay for it. Other teams might not. So 3 turnovers last week, you've got to cut down on that, and you've got to cut down on penalties. 10 penalties for 100 yards last week for the Nittany Lions. Turnovers and penalties, those are things that you can fix. Those are things that come from coaching. Those are things that has come from decision making. And, you know, those are things that really you're just beating yourself. Penn State cannot afford to beat themselves in this game. We know how big of a deal this game is. We know how big it is. Can you imagine Penn State starting 0-2? It's looking very likely for many. They cannot afford to drop to 0-2. Their playoff berths and their Big Ten title hopes are all still intact if they win this game. If not, they all vanish. So don't beat yourself. Make good decisions. We've seen James Franklin make some poor coaching calls and coaching decisions in years past, especially the last time this game was in Happy Valley, trying to rush on 4th and 5. You cannot afford to do that. That's beating yourself. If Penn State doesn't do that, they dominate the time of possession. If Sean Clifford has time to throw and has time to make plays the way he did last week against Indiana, the Nittany Lions have a very good chance to hang in this game, and by the end of it all, win it. But what do we think will happen on Saturday night? Again, the site of College game day, huge Big Ten showdown, major playoff implications for both. Many would even say that it's bigger for Ohio State right now than it is for Penn State. What do we think happens? We think Ohio State gets the win. This has been a very close series, guys. First off, before we dive deeper into that, this has been a close series. Remember, the past 3 meetings decided by a combined 13 points. Penn State winning the game back in 2016. So you could even say the past 4 meetings have been decided by 16 points, which is still extremely impressive. An average of 4 points per game over the past 4 years. It's been close. It's been competitive. And this is a game where you can never count a team out. Remember last year, Penn State, major underdogs. I believe it was like 18.5 point underdogs at Ohio State last year. They found themselves down 21-0. Scored 17 unanswered to battle back and make it 21-17. Remember, without Sean Clifford, early in that third quarter and only lost 28-17. So they outscored Ohio State 17-7 over the remainder of that game, but just didn't have enough on the road to get the job done. Penn State's going to fight. There's no quit in this team. There never has been under James Franklin. They get down early to the Buckeyes at home. Don't rule them out because they're going to bounce back. James Franklin does not get blown out hardly at all. I believe 7 times he's lost a game by 13 points or more since he arrived at Penn State in 2014, and I believe 5 of those came in his first 2 years. Only 1 of those has come against Ohio State back in 2015. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. The game in Happy Valley will result in an Ohio State victory, but I don't think it comes by more than 14 points. Forget what the analysts are saying. Forget what the skeptics are saying. This game is not going to be a blowout. The game against Indiana, sure, it goes down as a loss, but was a lot closer and was a lot better of a performance from Penn State than people are giving them credit for. They were harshly ridiculed. They were harshly dropped in the rankings. They're harshly disrespected with the point spread out in Vegas. The Nittany Lions put up one heck of a fight, but for the second year in a row, fall just short. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert on YouTube. Make sure to continue to like, comment, subscribe, and share our videos. And also make sure to check out everything down in that description below. Again, if you love college football, this is the place for you. We will have our Against the Spread picks for all of our games this weekend over on our website, thegridironexpert.com. Sign up for those expert picks. Sign up for the newsletter. Just came out today. If you didn't receive it, make sure you're signed up. Make sure to check your inbox. And also make sure you sign up for that BETNOW promo code. Get that $1,000 cash sign-up bonus. Get our exclusive Patreon account. Get our exclusive Patreon content. So much college football news, content, analysis that if you love the game, you don't want to miss everything right there down in the description. And once again, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on The Gridiron Expert.